Welcome to Just Break Up, the podcast about love, heartbreak, and all the relationship advice you don't want to hear. My name is Sierra DeMulder.
And I'm Sam Blackwell. And today we're going to answer a letter from somebody who is trying to find the right words. But before we begin, we just want to give you our Surgeon General's warning, which is that Sierra and I are not licensed mental health practitioners.
No, we are not professionals. We are not trained in this. We're only here to offer our humble musings to hopefully shed some understanding and maybe some laughs on the incredibly rewarding, but mostly confusing experience that is love. So please take our advice as you see fit in your life. All right, Sam, it's Monday. So what is the check-in topic of the week?
Our check-in topic is inspired by a letter that we got from Why Can't We Be Friends, whose pronouns are she, her, who's writing from the void. And basically, Why Can't We Be Friends is asking us about having friendships with men, and the fact that many of the people that she's dated in the past, who have all been men, have been like really not okay with her having friends who are men. And she's like, I don't understand why. Like, it feels unreasonable to me. You know, I don't want to accommodate like losing these friendships for somebody that I'm dating. Like, nothing about these friendships have been like uncomfortable or improper, right? Like, they're all 100% platonic. I've been friends with them for forever, single with other people. Like, it's not going to turn into anything. And I make that really clear to or she has made it really clear to her exes, and that hasn't assuaged their concerns about it. So we thought it would be fun to rant a little bit about some of the ways in which we have these unreasonable expectations of our partners, and why we have this idea that like we can't have relationships or friendships with people who aren't the same gender as us.
Yes. Yeah. And two things I want to say before I start ranting. One, I think because the letter writer identified, I think, as hetero, or we can assume that from the way she wrote about her.
She's a cishet woman.
Yeah. And because of that, we're going to talk a lot about, you know, being friends with the, quote, opposite gender. And we know at Just Break Up that gender is not as binary as society presents it to be. And that also just like automatically erases, you know, queer people from the equation, and makes sexuality a binary too. So, you know, general blanket, like, you know, that's not what we mean, sort of thing. And also I wanted to say, like, as much as I'm about to rant about this, I know that it can be really challenging. I know that it can trigger a lot of insecurities in us, and that often our insecurities are way louder and needier than our security, our secureness, and our confidence. And so this isn't to shame anyone who struggles with this, because I have definitely struggled with this in the past. And also, sometimes our insecurities need like a stern talking to.
Yeah.
Sometimes our insecurities need to like be pushed into the light to see how ridiculous they are and how unsustainable they are. That's what it is. It's like, yeah, I understand. I empathize with our insecurities of like the threat to our love, or our threat to our desire, or our relationship, or whatever it is. But it's just so unsustainable to be jealous of friends in this context, particularly when it comes to gender, because of the reasons I've already mentioned and the ones we're about to rant about. That for me, in my general self-help work, sometimes a good old-fashioned like shaming of my insecurities, not really, but like a shaming, you know, whatever. Anyway, so you go ahead, you start the rant.
It's just funny.
I just mean, like, sometimes it's like almost embarrassing. My insecurity is embarrassing. And sometimes it's good to like embarrass it, to be like, this isn't real. This isn't sustainable. You know, your wife isn't going to cheat on you with every other person who has boobs. You know, that's not real.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I think that like part of it is, at least for me, is this idea that like straight cis men in our society are just like so coddled that they think that like anything that makes them uncomfortable is like bad or like shouldn't happen, right? Where it's like, instead of doing the work to like go inward and say like, okay, well, what's coming up for me around this thing, right? Like because we don't hold men accountable for their own self-work, right? Like we just create spaces where they can lash out and behave like children, and we're just okay with that, is that like then they don't do any of the self-work. So this kind of stuff comes up, and then we have a person who, like the letter writer, who's like, I'm not going to just capitulate to this whim that you have, and then they don't know what to do with that information, right? It's like, but you're supposed to do it in the way that I want it to be done. So like, I think that there are like societal things here that have like really insulated men from having to do anything that makes them uncomfortable. And like, as somebody who has been socialized as a man, right? Like as somebody who grew up identifying as a man, right? Like I have seen this firsthand in my own experience, the way that other people around me have created spaces for me to not have to take accountability for things, right? Because of the body that I'm in. So like, I think that that's a big part of it, right? Like I also think about what would happen if Peter cheated on me, right? Like it is something that comes up in me. And instead of saying, oh, then that means that he should not be friends with people, or he should not go out to the bar, or whatever it is, instead I say to myself, he is trustworthy. So what is happening in my body, and how do I tend to that? Rather than saying, you, Peter, need to change your behavior because he's not doing anything wrong by having friends that are men, by having dated people in the past, by going out and talking with a stranger at a bar, right? Like these are all things that are in the parameters of our relationship. So I have to do the work of saying, what's coming up for me, and how do I hold myself differently given that I'm feeling something intensely about this? And I think that a lot of cis white or cis het men haven't had to do that sort of parenting for themselves because other people have done it for them, and because I don't want to say nobody has offered them the tools, but they haven't picked up the tools to be able to do that type of work.
Yeah. And I also think more generally too, like we aren't really taught to sit in uncomfortable, nervous system things when they come up. Like, oh my God, I see my significant other talking to somebody else whom I perceive to be beautiful or whatever. That makes me have these weird, uncomfortable little butterfly feelings, and my heart rate might go up, or I might be activated or triggered to think about a different time in which I was cheated on or whatever. That physical discomfort, like we haven't really been taught that if you just endure it, it often de-escalates, like if you just say like, okay, I'm feeling escalated right now. I'm going to take a couple deep breaths and then it dissipates. Right. I also think that this sort of thinking around gender and relationships and friendships, like is so trivializing. It makes everyone so one dimensional.
Yeah.
Because the messages that it's sending is like, one, hetero men view all other women as sexual objects. They're incapable of seeing people as multidimensional things or as things other than a romantic thing, which is untrue, right?
Absolutely.
Which might be what we are culturally conditioned to think, but we are, like your boyfriend is capable of viewing another woman as not as a sexual object. Women are capable of being more than just that, right? Or they're capable of sustaining friendships with people of all different genders and all different presentations and sexualities. I feel like it just makes everything so flat, and we only see one side of people. And you don't want to put your partner on an island, like the letter writer says. Like you don't want to. I have totally cut off friendships before. I have done that at the whims of my significant others, and I've also wanted my partners to do that because, like you said earlier, it felt easier to put up those barriers in our relationships, to declare those rules. Instead of actually confronting, well, what is making me feel so deeply wounded in the first place? And instead of asking something external to solve it, what would it feel like if I internally rectified or soothed that pain of like, oh my God, what if somebody's better than me? What if they leave me? What if they cheat on me or whatever?
For sure. Yeah, for sure. I mean, it just like essentializes people, right?
Yes.
In like a really uncomfortable way that doesn't provide any sort of nuance to anyone's experience in.
Yes.
Right. And so I think that like this is probably a pretty common thing that comes up for folks around like around the ways in which men perceive other men, right? And I think part of it is because like they're holding up a mirror to themselves and being like, I don't actually know how to have meaningful relationships with women because like I've never learned how, right? And so like it's hard for me to imagine that another man would be able to have a platonic relationship with a woman because like I've never done that. I've only viewed women as sexual objects, right?
That the letter writer put in the letter that I want to articulate because I have heard this. I've heard this from an ex. The letter writer said that her exes have claimed that these men are only friends with her because they want to sleep with her. Mm-hmm. And do you know that thing that goes around on the internet every once in a while that's like, a man doesn't change his sexist behavior until he has a daughter and he realizes that people are going to sexualize his daughter, like
yeah,
which is just like
disgusting,
so disappointing. Well, it's like it's not disappointing that they go through that growth. That's like, okay, good job. And also like it really showcases how prevalent and sick sexism is, that again, it just makes people one-dimensional. It makes, sure. Of course, these men who are, these friends in this letter writer's male friends, they're not multidimensional, emotionally rich and complex people. They're animals and brutes who are using her to be close to her, who only want, a physical relationship with her and have been maintaining the charade of a friendship for a decade just to get her in her pants once. Like it really is a disservice to everyone. And it's funny, we're kind of saying opposite things, but they are happening at the same time. They can exist. Mm-hmm. Like it's a yes and thing that we have culturally conditioned men to not have to really deal with the discomfort of their emotions. Like that's just what patriarchy does. And in that same hand, and the other side of the weapon is we limit men. We limit their expectations, their emotional abilities. We undercut them. And say like, no, you're not an emotionally complex human. Right. You're a one-note person, You
just want sex. Yep.
Yes, exactly. And we know that's not true. And that's why patriarchy hurts everybody. So
for sure. And there are many men in both of our lives who like have really delved into that emotional complexity and like have talked to me about their experiences with that double-edged sword where it's like, I don't really have the space to be emotionally complex or people don't expect it of me. And also, right, like people essentialize me in a lot of different ways. So it's not to say that like this isn't like a challenge for people. And I have a lot of respect for folks who like really want to dig into how masculinity has like set them up in ways to be disconnected from people and are actively trying to figure out how to do that. And it sounds like maybe these male friends in your life are right, like doing that as well, or at least the letter writer's friends. So like, I want to also be clear that like, this isn't a given, right? Like this isn't the truth for every straight man that is like in the world, but there are for sure patterns that exist because of like the cultural 100%. Conditioning that we have. And that like, the goal here isn't to like cut cishet men down at the ankles, but instead to like invite them into some of this deeper work that many of us are doing because we've had no choice but to do it.
Totally. It's almost as though like to the letter writer, like I would say, if this comes up again, you can say, if you don't think these men in my lives are capable of having complex, emotionally enriching relationships with a woman, then I'm really sorry that your life has been lacking that.
Yeah.
This is important to me. Mm-hmm. These people are important to me. And if you can't respect that, like GTFO.
Yeah. No offense, I think it says more about the person who's making that demand than it does about the other men who are in your 100%. Life, right? Like there's something that's coming up for them. There's some sort of wound there.
Right.
That, again, it's like,
Yeah,
How do you
maybe
hold a
that's how
mirror
they
up to-
see women.
For sure,
It's like,
absolutely.
I'm sorry you're missing out on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Friendship.
And maybe they don't want to, and maybe that's like something that they're trying to work on. But it is like, I think it's an indication of again, this sort of like really gendered, binary, and not complex idea of like how humans operate and the emotional richness and complexity that each of us has, whether or not we're able to dig into it or express it.
Yeah. And here's my challenge to folks who are listening who are not men, who are maybe on the other side of this non-binary coin. Also look at the ways in which you are internalizing messages from our cultured conditioning about sex, gender, identity. Like, your boyfriend who has a really good friend who identifies as a woman, that woman isn't like a homewrecker or out to get him. Right. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. That woman isn't a threat to your relationship. Your boyfriend is allowed to have meaningful relationships with people who don't have the same genitals that he does. That's what it. Here's where the rant comes. Is what the fuck is our obsession with fucking assumed genitals? Number one, because like I've only seen like, I don't know how many genitals. Like the lights were off, but like, do you know what I mean? The amount of assumptions we make and then the rules we make based off of these genitals. It's just silly. Fucking absurd.
It's silly.
Absurd. It's absurd. All right. And rant. Okay. So want to get into this week's letter?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Today's letter is from Miss Mcfeels-A-Lot, who's writing to us from my bike and whose pronouns are she, her. Hello, Sam and Sierra. I'm not actually on my bike, but I always mentally write letters to you while cycling to uni or back, and now I'm finally sending one. There is something that has been weighing heavily on my relationship, and I could really use your perspective from a faraway tower that you are in. Me, 24, and my partner, Mark, he, him, 25, have been together for 5 years now. We put a lot of work into this relationship, and I've truly never felt more loved or supported than I do with Mark. But in this past year, we have been struggling with a lot of communication dynamics where I often find myself wanting to address certain issues or, in general, aiming for a deeper emotional connection. And I feel like we keep hitting a roadblock. I tend to be the, quote, can we talk about it, girlfriend, while he tends to be the, quote, I don't know what you want me to say, boyfriend. It's frustrating because I genuinely want us to work through things together, but our communication styles clash, and there's only so far this can be sustained. I yearn for a more meaningful and open conversation where we can express our thoughts, emotions, and concerns without misunderstanding each other. Although I love this man so deeply, Mark, to me, is like a Rubik's Cube of emotions, where I'm always close to figuring him out, but never quite there to be able to put all of these colors together. The issue extends also to the amount of communication we expect throughout the day when we are apart. He is currently doing a very demanding master's program, which takes much of his both time and energy, which I understand, but what I don't know is to what extent should I make space for him without forgetting about my own needs. I'm also scared that this excuse will just continue to whatever he does next, since I fear he will always have a very demanding career. Where I need your help is on how to bring up this topic moving forward. All Mark can hear is I'm not enough, and his reaction always makes me feel I'm too much. I know you've touched on this many times before, but I've listened back to all those episodes and still find myself never having the right words to express this without him feeling like even his best, which I believe he is doing, is not enough. To you, I might sound like I'm spitting words of wisdom in this letter, but when I actually have to talk about it with Mark, my emotions get in the way and it never comes out right. It's like when I was learning French and in my head, I totally knew the entire language and could formulate all those sentences, but in reality, when I had to speak, it was nothing coherent. The funny part is that this issue doesn't even cross my mind that often and is quite small in perspective of the entire relationship. But in the moment of these fights, they always feel so massive to the point that I keep getting anxiety attacks from it. So I wonder if it's something that I should pay attention to more. Sam and Sierra, how do I know when I'm pushing too hard for a relationship when I should just let it go? and when it's pushing just enough into the discomfort I need for growth. Please help a girl out. Thank you for reading this. This podcast has been a lifeline for me during my toughest moments, reminding me of my worth and giving me the tools to keep going. And for that, I'm eternally grateful. All the love, Miss Mcfeels-A-Lot.
All right, Miss Mcfeels-A-Lot. I can tell that you're feeling a lot in this letter. And I just want to say that, like, I really appreciate that your relationship is really working for you, that it is, you talk about how loved and supported you feel in this relationship, and that, like, it's just that these moments are causing so much friction for you or eliciting such a strong reaction from you that it feels like you can't get your head above water in them. And I think that it can be really challenging to have these types of conversations. It can be really challenging to find the right words to describe how we're feeling, or to get really curious about what the other person is feeling or going through. And that practice takes time, but it doesn't mean that when we're learning or when we're trying things out for the first time, it isn't deeply, deeply uncomfortable. And so Sierra and I are going to talk a little bit about how to maybe approach some of these conversations. We are going to talk a little bit about some of the language that you might use. But mostly, I think we're going to talk about how you can care for yourself in these situations where these big emotions, these big sort of panic is coming up for you when you're having these conversations. So we're going to get into that in just a moment.
All right, my darling. Thank you so much for writing and trusting us with this letter. I want to say I relate to pieces of it really deeply, particularly the idea that you shared in the last paragraph of, like, this is not even like an everyday thing. This is not a huge weight weighing on your relationship every moment, but when it comes up, it's so big and it makes you feel so disconnected from this person who you feel like is your person, and I think those types of relationship challenges can really make us feel insecure, because they can take us from that good feeling of safety and security to, oh my God, I'm in crisis. We are disconnected. We're not connecting. Is something wrong with our relationship? And I know that can really be tricky to navigate. And I also know, it can be really hard to look at your loved one and really feel like there's more there that they're not saying, that there's more there that they're feeling, but they don't know how to articulate yet, and really want to be able to, like, crack the code, the Rubik's Cube, and say the right thing and do the right thing to prompt them to share, Yeah.
And it's like, unfortunately, your partner is not like the Minds of Moria. You can't just, like, find the right password and, like, get them to suddenly open all of their doors to you. Like, it's just not
a little Lord of the Rings nerdery.
It's not
going
to happen. It's been a long time since I've done a Lord of the Rings reference, so I really wanted to throw it in there.
You gotta keep it fresh.
Yeah, absolutely.
Gotta keep it. And I want to say that's so relatable. Like, so it's not even that you're, like, dating potential right now. You're not. It's like you're looking at this person who you know so intimately and being like, I know there's more there. And, and also you're saying, I want to feel connected on this. I want to feel like my emotions are understood, right? There's a need here. And it's not just to be listened to. It's a need to be understood and to be met on this emotional level. And that's challenging. That's something that can make you feel really lonely.
Yeah. Well, and I also wonder if it's like a need to understand too, right? Like, I'm just like thinking about a lot of things. I'm thinking about my own relationship where I like have so tried to plumb the depths of what Peter is feeling and had to realize that I will never know because I'm not in his body, right? Like
that's it.
I don't know what it's like to be doing the things that he's doing or feeling the way that he's feeling, right? And sometimes I get these glimpses of things where I'm just like, oh, is this what Peter is feeling in this moment? Like this type of emotion, right? Like, and I'll never know because I'm not, right? Like, and I'm also thinking about the idea of like, what Alok Vedmenon talks about all the time, which is that like we can have compassion without comprehension, right? We don't need to know the full depth of our partner's experience for us to at least like sit in the space of like, I don't know what it's like to be in your body. I don't know what it's like to feel what you're feeling. I don't know if like you're even feeling the depth of what I'm assuming that you're feeling, right? Like, so all I can do is like sit here and hold compassion for it in a way that is not necessarily like trying to take on what you're feeling, but sitting in the acknowledgement and recognition of the fact that you are feeling something, you're stressed, you're doing something, you're having a reaction, but that I'll never know what it is. But I can still hold space for it. I can still like hold that it is challenging or exciting or whatever it is, and kind of connect it to my own experience, but not take it on.
Yes. And that requires a ton of security within yourself, and to be able to say like, I don't need to understand that turmoil that I see under the surface that I'm assuming is turmoil, right?
Yeah, for sure.
It literally, I am that bitch who cannot not ask, are you okay? Do you know what I mean? Like, it's like,
no, I do it too. And I feel the words coming out of my mouth, and I'm annoyed with myself right now.
Yeah. Willow and I have gotten to the pattern where I'm like, I'm just saying this because I have to say this. Are you okay? Is anything wrong? She'll be like, nope. And I'm like, cool, just saying it because I need to. Bye. Like, I don't even listen to her fucking answer. That's because us like anxiously attached cuties, like, we're constantly looking for ways in which we can earn love, right? Mm-hmm. Earn connection, earn security. Listen to our letter writer. I'm going to assume here, based off what you told us, that this is, in all other ways, a emotionally healthy relationship, right? I'm going to assume best intentions and best foundation of your relationship and of your partner, and that he's not withholding things from you in a manipulative way, that this is just the way he communicates, right? That being said, before I go down that assumption road, emotions are not a bad thing. Sharing emotions, communicating is not a bad thing. And if you are not getting what you want from this man, and a deeper, more communicative emotional connection is absolutely something that you have a right to look for in another relationship or leave a relationship to explore.
For sure.
Obviously, the show is called Just Break Up. That is the foundation of our fucking show. But I think our best advice could come to help you work through this, not away from it. But this is an issue, even if it's not an issue every day. But I'm assuming he's not doing anything manipulative or cruel or withholding or whatnot, right? Mm-hmm. So here's some things that I want you to ask yourself. When these emotional conversations come up, are you, and he's engaging in them, the first thing I would ask myself is like, am I believing what he is saying? Yeah. Or am I believing what he is presenting me with? You know what I mean? Like, I'm really busy. I'm exhausted. I have nothing to say. Okay, so what does it feel like to believe that? And what's tricky for us anxiously attached cuties is that then we often have to soothe that anxiety in us, that worry in us, that connection, that need for connection, that very valid and important need for connection in us by ourselves. Then it's like, okay, well, what does it look like to work through these emotionally fraught things on my own, And I'm not saying, again, this is not me like voting for an emotionally one-sided relationship. Yep. But I often found that when I was in similar scenarios, I was trying to like dig for a deeper response. Yeah. And there just wasn't one.
Yeah. There was nothing else under the surface. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yep. I've been there for sure. Yeah. And I think that's like, part of it is like emotional attachment. Sometimes I think it's also about like, just like what we were taught about what our roles were in terms of like pleasing people or like fixing problems or whatever. Or maybe it's just like a thing where it's like, oh, I really want to have deep, meaningful conversations with you about what's going on with us emotionally. Like, let's get into it, right? When somebody else is like, that actually isn't helpful for me, right? Like that's actually not how I process. Instead, I need time alone or whatever it is, right? And I think that like part of what I've had to do in my relationship is not like find the right words to get Peter to talk more, but instead to talk more when we're not in crisis, right? Like sort of have some of these conversations more often so that they get more common for us or like practiced for us. And also that like my expectation is not that like the conversation is about me getting into the depths of what Peter is going through, but instead understanding and talking about how things are landing on me, like what is coming up for me in this situation, and not to say like, say the right thing, do exactly what I need to do, unless I need to hear a particular thing. And then I will have to ask for that particular thing to be said to me, right? Like that.
Yes.
Right. You know what I mean?
It.
Like that's like, so it is about like, what do I need from this conversation? What am I trying to get from it? Where am I trying to find assurance? Where am I trying to find connection? And figuring that stuff out so that I can then kind of draw out of the conversation what I need. Does that work all the time? Absolutely not. No, it does not, because like we're two different people in two different places, and sometimes we're going to miss each other. In fact, like I would say maybe like, I don't know, 50% of the time we don't quite understand what the other person is saying, right? Like, cause I
think that's such a good thing to point out.
Like we're so different. We are such different people.
Even you too, like, you know, literally life partners, people who love each other and have a very healthy relationship have 100% different worldviews and bodies and
for sure.
nervous systems and brain functions. You know?
For sure. And sometimes if Peter asks if I'm upset, I say no, even though I am upset, right? Because we're like emotionally complex people. And then like I figure out how to come back to him and tell him like what was actually upsetting me. But like, and again, it just speaks to like the idea that we all process through stuff differently. And sometimes what might look like somebody being uncommunicative or whatever it might be might actually just be them being tired, right? Needing time to like sleep it off, needing time to figure out what they want to say, needing time. Like there's so many different ways that our processing shows up. And so like the idea that we're always going to be in perfect conversation with each other about everything and be able to speak to our experiences in a way that the other person is going to be able to hear is impossible for us, right? Like that's not a reasonable expectation for us to have. So part of what we need to do is like sit in the discomfort of the fact that no matter how much we love our partners and want to be with them, we're never going to fully understand them. And we have to find ways to hold that complexity for ourselves and assuage the feelings that come up when we're like, I don't know what's happening. I don't know what they're doing. I don't know what they're thinking. What if they're thinking something terrible? What if they are thinking something terrible, right? Like what would happen? But like no amount of like trying to extract information about someone's emotional state is going to prevent bad things from happening or going to prevent them from feeling bad or prevent them from being frustrated with us or whatever it might be that is kind of the fear that's coming up for us in that.
Yeah. And I also, you know, as I move through my relationship, my marriage, I've noticed that, like Sam said, it's not just that we don't always like see eye to eye, but it's that like a lot of that, you know, you wrote in your letter, like, can we talk this out, girlfriend, or whatever. Uh-huh. I've realized that we do that, and we've kind of developed a shorthand for like, we've excavated this enough. There's no farther point of understanding because it's just going to be her and I sitting back and forth being like, but this is how I feel. And then she'll be like, well, this is how I feel. And I said, when you did this, I did this. You know, it's granted, like I do feel like we have a strong relationship founded on communication. That's just her personality and our life circumstance right now. But I've learned how to practice walking away from conversations without having to excavate them for more connection, and instead really practice feeling secure in our connection, regardless of one hard conversation. And that's what I want you to do, my darling letter writer, is say, my relationship is strong, even if there's one hard conversation this week, right? Mm-hmm. My emotions aren't bad and aren't a threat to the health of my relationship, even if they come out in a way that's like inarticulate, right? I think one thing that Sam and I haven't said yet that I just want to cover really quickly is, you know, you are allowed to, Sam kind of said it earlier, so let me just restate it, of like, it's not that you can pull a different reaction out of your boyfriend. You can say, when you don't respond, it makes me feel like this. I know that my feelings aren't always right, though. I know that they often come from my wounds or my insecurity or whatever. But when you do this, it makes me feel this. Can you help me understand it in a way so that I have a different reaction? Do you know what I mean? And again, this is all based off of the foundational assumption that this is a healthy relationship and he's not an asshole.
Yes, yep.
I just know people out there are like, well, he's being an asshole. You know, we're going to assume that he's not. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that this, you know, like the idea of sort of saying about how stuff is landing on you is also about like not necessarily assigning blame, because like, as you say in the letter, right? Like you're both trying your best in this and your bests are like not matching, and that's okay, right? It's okay to try our best and have it not do the thing that we want it to do. So like, it's okay to say like, hey, when you do this, like, this is kind of how it lands on me. I'm not saying that like you're doing anything wrong, but I want to share with you that like, this is the response that comes up in me when you don't tell me this thing, or when you don't, like, you can say that kind of stuff, but not in a way to necessarily get them to change themselves, but just in a way to, again, let them know how you're feeling about the situation, right? To have them to sort of practice what it looks like to name some of that stuff. And you say like, even in your letter, right? I don't want him to feel like his best is not good enough, right? And it's okay that his best isn't good enough because our best is so often not good enough, right? And it's not good enough in particular for getting you what you need or for what you want out of the relationship, which is fine, because that's what relationships are, is like missing each other and not necessarily getting everything that we need and all of that complicated stuff that is relationships. So like, I think it's okay for you to share about some of this stuff and how this is feeling for you. But again, right, it's not your responsibility to like make sure that he feels good about the conversation, because that's not actually what needs to happen, right? If we're looking for what it looks like for us to have meaningful conversations where we're connecting, that means that honesty has to be part of it. That means that like discomfort is going to be part of it. And it's okay for him to say, I don't want to have this conversation anymore. And it's okay for you to say, like, I want more out of this, and to have that incompatibility be there, as long as you're figuring out ways to believe each other and to see each other and to sort of work around the fact that you just have different communication styles when it comes to talking about this stuff.
Exactly. All right, my darling, we hope this makes you feel heard, understood, empowered. We know this is tricky, but you are capable of moving through this with your partner and on your own. And we hope this helps. Thank you so much for writing.
Absolutely. We love you. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. If you are interested in more content from us, or if you're interested in getting your episodes ad-free, you can support us on Patreon. If you support us on Patreon for as little as $5 a month, you'll get an additional bonus weekly episode as well as ad-free episodes. That's patreon.com/justbreakuppod.
You can slide into our DMs, send us your favorite relationship memes, but most importantly, you can submit your questions about all matters of the heart at justbreakuppod.com, which is also where you can find our merchandise.
Please remember to like, follow, subscribe, give us a 5-star rating and review. This literally keeps our mics on and helps us reach more broken-hearted souls who need two random strangers giving them relationship advice.
Just Break Up is a production of Duvid Media, original music, recording, editing, producing, all magical things by our good friend Spencer Worth Davis. Make sure to check out his podcasts. And remember, one of the keys of communication is understanding that there's no perfect way to ask a question to get a response that you want to hear. Sometimes the truth is just what they're saying. The truth is all that they offer, and there's no deeper thing that they're withholding from you. Sometimes it's more important to stop, listen, pay attention to your body, and hear what they're saying to you with their words or their actions. And if all else fails,
just break up.